I think this Oregon football roster is the best in a decade. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Lots to get to today, but we start with Oregon's roster. We'll talk a little bit of everything, including mailbag questions later in today's show. But we start with the roster because I keep thinking about weaknesses in this Oregon roster, and I just don't really see them. I think safety is the biggest glaring weakness. I don't know that they have a super rangy guy over the top. We'll see what Kobe Savage, the Kansas State transfer, is, but I think this is the best Oregon roster that we have seen top to bottom since 2014 when they went to the national championship game. Now, was Marcus Mariota a better quarterback than Dillon Gabriel? Yes, I certainly believe that to be the case, which is not a slight at Dillon Gabriel. It's just to say he's not Marcus Mariota, and he's probably not Bo Nix, but you know what he can be? A Vernon Adams type, a Darren Thomas type, Jeremiah Masoli type. And those guys were really good and led Oregon teams to great heights. Had Vernon Adams not been hurt, Oregon makes the playoff in 2015. I will die on that hill. But the reason I like this Oregon team so much is about sevenfold. There are a lot of different reasons. I'll summarize them quickly here. Number one, I think defensive line with Derek Harmon, Michigan State transfer, I think they're nasty. I think they're really, really good. And I think they actually have the potential to be better than last year because your starting defensive tackles a year ago, yeah, Brandon Dorlus was an all-conference caliber guy, but whoever started next to him, whether it was Casey Rogers or Popo Amavai or Taki Taimani, those guys were solid, did a lot of really good things. Were they all-conference performers? No. And are these guys? Yes, I think they absolutely can be. So I think that's where it starts, is your ability to disrupt the quarterback and another team's offense starts up front. And I think Oregon up front with Jordan Birch and those other guys and the edge players who are going to be even better than they were last year with an offseason to get their bodies into whatever game shape they need it to be in or the coaches want them to be in. I think they're all going to be awesome. Uyunglele and Winston and Purchase and Tuioti. I think that's just such an outstanding group on that side of the ball. And then you just keep looking, you go, okay, you got a veteran offensive line, 4 of which were starters or heavy rotation players last year. You're bringing a 6th-year guy, so the offensive line is going to be really good. The receivers are one of the best units in all of college football. I don't know that I've ever been able to say that about an Oregon receiving corps, but that's where the Ducks are at right now. The tight ends go 3 deep. The quarterbacks even look like they go 3 deep. They certainly at least go 2 deep as one of the best rooms in the entire country. All conference guys at linebackers, all conference caliber guys in the secondary. There just aren't any weaknesses out there. And I got to thinking about this when a question came in, and YouTube comments, you can get mailbag questions over there. X, formerly known as Twitter. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, go join the flock over at a subtext. This question came in from Kevin. Mailbag question for you, Spencer. I don't know if you answered this question before, but where would you rank last year's Oregon team against all-time best Oregon teams? For example, the 2023 team versus the 2014 team that made the playoffs, or the 2023 teams versus the Chip Kelly teams. So I'm only going to put teams in here that I've watched live. So 2001, for instance, with Joey Harrington. I don't really know where I'd slot them. I know they were very good, but it's hard when you haven't visually seen the entire team play, because I was 4 years old when that happened, so I wasn't really a diehard college football fan yet. That started about the time I was 5 or 6 years old. So I think the 2014 team that went to the national championship was the best Oregon team of my lifetime. I think 2023 is probably third. I think the number 2 team would be the 2012 Oregon team. Mariota's first year starting with Chip Kelly. That team was crazy good. Ertz was out. that team could have won the national championship. And it was supposed to be against Kansas State. Both teams lost, and Oregon thumped them in the Fiesta Bowl. I think 2010 would be in there. I think 2022 with a healthy Bo Nix, or 2013 with a healthy Marcus Mariota, both very good. 2015 was good, and 2019. Those are my top Oregon teams, my top 7 ranked in order that I've watched in my lifetime. And the reason I feel so great about this Oregon roster is not just the newcomers that they've brought in, whether it's Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, Jabbar Muhammad, Evan Stewart, all sorts of guys, but that 2023 team that played the national runners-up to a 3-point loss twice, Oregon's returning 68% of the offensive production from that team and 70% of the defensive production. On average, that is good for 28th nationally. So for the Ducks to be in that position, like, I think last year's team was incredibly good. Washington was just a little bit better. That's all it was. I think that team was ridiculously good. You could put last year's team up on the field up against some of the best Oregon teams, like 2010, for instance. I think 2023 probably beats 2010. Hence why I had them ahead on my rankings. Would 2020... Heck, I think you could make the case that 2023's team, top to bottom, was better than 2012. In just in terms of NFL talent, we know that's true. They set an Oregon program record with 8 guys being selected, 5 of which I believe came in the 4th round. So I think that team was awesome, and to be bringing back such a huge percentage of it, and then to add on top of it guys who I am confident, because I've seen their careers play out at other destinations, I am confident come in, make an impact, and play at a high level right away. That's a great place to be. So there have been a lot of great Oregon teams, but I think last year's was truly one of the best, and they just ran into a buzzsaw with a first-round quarterback and receivers that went in the first, second, and third round, and a first-round tackle. Like, they were just really good. That's what it was. And I think you can find those sorts of examples in every single sport. You know, think back to what's a great example here. Going through Jordan's Bulls in their heyday. John Stockton and Karl Malone never won a title. You know one of the reasons why? Jordan's Bulls were there. How many Super Bowl caliber teams just couldn't beat the Patriots? Just because you don't win doesn't mean you weren't at that level. And Oregon absolutely was at that sort of level a year ago. And I think it's a great sign that Lanning, had the program there in his second year. And again, that's another reason why I feel great about Oregon going into 2024. Like, the hype in my head builds up every day. By the day, I get more excited. I was playing with an Oregon fan recently. He didn't listen to or watch the show, which, I was butthurt about. Not actually, but a little. Anyway, so he said, hey, I tune in every Saturday and whatnot, but I don't follow the offseason much. Like, how are we going to be next year? And I said, highest expectations since 2014, because last year was so good, was almost so great. They bring back a bunch of that team, and they've brought in a bunch of good players. The second-ranked transfer portal class, according to 24/7 Sports. And that is not a fluff ranking. It's not overinflated in some way. There are so many guys in there who I've talked about on the show that are going to be great for the Ducks, and I'm just stoked about it. So, loved that question, Kevin. Thanks for sending it in. Have a lot more to get to on the show, including Oregon needing to think small in terms of how good their roster is comparatively before they think big. You can think small event, big event, medium-sized event, whatever you want, Game Time has got it. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc., whatever you want. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Go take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That is Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Game Time, lowest price guaranteed. Second segment sips, always guaranteed. Again, YouTube comments, X formerly known as Twitter, or join the flock over at Subtext, get priority access and all sorts of other perks. Mailbag has been chock full, and I love seeing that. I get through them as quickly as I can. This one from Mike. Can you compare our 3-deep roster? Do you mean 2-deep? Our 3-deep roster with, say, that of Georgia or Ohio State? I know this is about building depth. So 24/7 Sports does not yet have their team composite scores out for the 2024 season, evaluating all the talent, or at least I wasn't able to locate that exact metric. But for the 2024 recruiting cycle, Ohio State brought in the 5th-ranked high school class and the number 8 transfer portal class. Conversely, Oregon brought in the 3rd-ranked high school class and the 2nd-best transfer portal class. Now, those are just numbers on a sheet, my notes specifically for today's show. I do indeed prepare, contrary to what some may think. I hope it's evident that I prepare. Anyway, I digress. So if you look at that, you might think, well, Oregon's got the better roster. They got the better high school class. They've got the better transfer portal class. But what you have to remember is not every player from that transfer class, and especially not every player from that high school class, is going to be playing this year. And it's also hard to keep track of previous recruiting classes, because if you say, well, Ohio State has averaged, 5.5 over the last 3 years, and Oregon's averaged 8.5 with their recruiting class rankings. They were number 9 a season ago, number 3 in 2024, and I think about number 17 is what it was back in the 2022 class when, Cristobal left and then Lanning came in. They were able to, kind of salvage it and land big recruits. They'd ended up 13th overall, actually, for the high school class, which is pretty darn good. So I think that for Oregon, they're in Ohio State's class in terms of the roster. And I think that's where Oregon fans need to be thinking first. It's easy to jump to, a Georgia, who I think are the preseason national title favorites. They are, according to FanDuel, literally. And I think they should be in the minds of college football fans. Like, I really think that this is Georgia's world, and we're just living in it right now. Because don't let last year's coming up short in the SEC championship game prevent you from remembering they won back-to-back national championships. And Oregon hired their head coach from there for a reason. Everybody wanted a piece of what Georgia was doing. So I think Georgia is on another level. But for Oregon right now, not just in the short term, because Ohio State is also a national title contender, but in the Big Ten landscape, that's where your attention has to be. I know regionality has been kind of thrown to the wind in college football, but the first thing you want to think about is, okay, can we win our conference? Can Oregon emerge as the Big Ten champions this year? The answer is yes. They can absolutely be in that sort of conversation. And I think now that the spring transfer portal window has come and gone, it might be worth bringing Jay Stevens of Locked On Ohio State back on. Let me know if you agree in the YouTube comments, and we can kind of talk about where these two rosters sit right now, because I think they're the two best teams in the Big Ten. And frankly, as time goes by, I feel better about Oregon than I do Ohio State. Now, the Buckeyes have an incredibly talented roster. They've got the best individual defensive player in JT Tuimoloau or Caleb Downs. Frankly, if you were to just say, hey, who are the 10 best or 5 best transfer or overall players between these two teams, those two guys would probably be at the top of the list, and they're both playing for Ohio State. But then you probably have Jabbar Muhammad in there, maybe a Jordan Birch or a Jeff Bossa. That would sort of depend. But Oregon can, not just can contend with Ohio State, I think they can beat Ohio State. Right now, with a game being played at Autzen Stadium, I'd pick them to beat Ohio State. The Buckeyes still don't know for sure who their quarterback is. It's probably going to be Will Howard. But the fact that Howard, who I like and think is solid, and can be better than what he's shown at Kansas State when given, the resources that he's got at Ohio State and the weapons around him. And they've got a great backfield, and Chip Kelly will dial up a great run game for him and everything. I feel better about having Dillon Gabriel compared to Will Howard after spring football has come and gone, and Howard wasn't able to put the clamps on the starting job. Like, you got an inexperienced guy in Devin Brown, who is a talented recruit, and a true freshman, Julian Sayin, out there pushing him for the spot. There have been zero rumblings that Dante Moore or Austin Novosad, who both look great in the spring game, by the way, are pushing Dillon Gabriel, because Gabriel is clearly the starter, and he's showing the coaches and the rest of the team and everybody else, media and fans alike, that that's a starting quarterback and you don't have to worry about it. And I just feel better about Oregon than Ohio State right now. So, doing a whole two deep comparison, Jay and I might get back together to do that at some point here on an upcoming episode of the show, only if you want me to. This is, of course, the People's Show. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Another question here came in from Bud. I understand that the TV networks will be selecting Big Ten games this week for their broadcasts next year. Perhaps we already know this, but given that Oregon is a top-tier school in the Big Ten for the foreseeable future, you got that right, is it likely Oregon will play Ohio State and Michigan more often than other teams in the conference? I would think so, and the selection that he's referring to is the Big Ten Conference essentially saying, what games are we putting in prime time? Which ones do we want to showcase? And that Oregon-Ohio State game, I don't know how it's not going to be game day with the amount of offseason hype these two teams are generating, the brands and television numbers that they've fostered over the last several years. I think that's going to be a big-time college football game. I don't know how game day could be looking anywhere else. The lineup of games that week, I don't think is incredibly strong. Let me just double check it here, because there will be other options, and you also don't know what storylines are going to pop up. But that October 12th game between Oregon and Ohio State, let's see, I think I'm on, like, it's just not an incredibly loaded lineup of games. Like, I still haven't seen one. Just Penn State, USC, that could be a really good game. Oklahoma, Texas, okay, that's tough. That's tough. that is really tough. So that's the only other game. Ole Miss, LSU, perhaps could be a huge game there, but I think between Ole Miss, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma in the SEC, you got Florida, Tennessee, and then you have Ohio State, Oregon. All right, so there are more games than I remember. Full disclosure, I did not remember there being that many games there. Still, I think if you're the Big Ten, I don't know how you're not putting Oregon against Ohio State and Michigan. Like, that's part of what's generating the interest and intrigue with realignment. Is like, man, you're going to go against these teams. We used to call them bowl games. Now we're just going to call them conference games. So, yeah, I don't know that Ohio State and Michigan, in fact, I am almost certain they won't be on the schedule every year. At least one of them will be. I cannot see a year in which you miss both Ohio State and Michigan. If they do, Oregon better win at least 11 games, is all I'll say there. This question came in from John. Hi, Spencer. A daily lurker here. We call them everydayers, John. Let's have a better term than lurker for yourself. With a question about the upcoming football season for the Ducks, with a D and whatnot. Lots of talk about the offense and defense sides of the ball, but little about special teams. How do we improve as much there as we have on offense and defense? So this is a twofold question, because I think there are two areas in special teams. One, not one, not three, two. There are two specifically that Oregon has to get better at to have the third side of the ball be improved from a year ago. And I'll tell you what those are. First, I'll tell you about Monopoly Go. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, Spencer. Well, you know what? We got to pause to talk about it anyway because there's so much good stuff in Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench, go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. The two areas I was referring to are the kick return game and clutch field goals. So let's start with the return game. Everydayers like yourself, John, may remember me saying this stat previously, but for those who pop in and out of the show, I appreciate you all anyway. Or if you're finding it for the first time, I'll bring you up to speed. A year ago, Oregon did not have a single kick return over 25 yards. That's just bad, not good. That should be a wide open position. Put somebody back there that's got a better feel for it. No disrespect to Gary Bryant. I like having him as a wide receiver. Does some good yards after catch stuff. If he hadn't returned kicks last year, I'd probably look at him as a candidate to do it because of the work that he does after he catches the football. However, a season of it is in the books, and it didn't produce a whole heck of a lot. So that's the first area. But the second one is clutch field goals. And this has been what's the best word to describe it? Troublesome area for the Ducks over the years. If you have to give Camden Lewis credit for beating Washington State in 2019. That was a big kick. They were down a point. And there's no tie, no overtime, nothing. You're either winning or losing. Oregon won the game. That was his true freshman year. Since then, does anyone have a clutch kick that Oregon is like? What's the last clutch Oregon field goal that was truly like, hey, sent the game to overtime, won it as time expired? I mean, it might be that 2019 kick, 2021. Can't think of one off the top of my head that was a big time clutch field goal. 2022, they didn't need any real. Well, didn't have a chance to kick one at the end of that Washington game. Didn't kick field goals of the Washington game in Seattle this year. So you see what I'm saying? Like, that's the other area. And look, Atticus Sappington is coming over from Oregon State. He missed one field goal last year. Great. That's fantastic. Did he have to kick any in a high-pressure situation? I don't know. I didn't watch every Oregon State game the way I watched every Oregon game. This is Locked On Ducks, not Locked On Beavers. So it's hard to measure that. Like Grant Metters in the spring game, turned some heads when he made a 49-yard field goal. It was great. It was awesome. That guy is not expected to be the starter. That's what Sappington, in theory, was brought in to do. But maybe Metters is better. I don't know. But I don't know what these guys do when the pressure's on. And that's what Oregon needs. It's a hard thing to find. Alabama didn't have clutch kickers for a very long time. So those are the special team areas I look for. Because I think the punt return game was good. Oregon didn't fumble the ball last year. Knock on wood. And I thought the punting game with Ross James and a little bit of Luke Dunn, I thought it was outstanding. Ross James was awesome. I think he's really, really good. And I look forward to having him back this year. So here's another question from Bud, and then we'll end the week with a thought I've had on Kyler Kasper. Does the current transfer portal status with the ability to transfer every year, now in an unlimited number of times, favorably impact Oregon in recruiting players across the country, as they may be more willing to take a shot at moving far from home, knowing that if they don't like it, they can easily transfer as soon as the following year? Well, I don't know that that's a consideration for players. And the conversations I've had with Brian Smith, who was on yesterday's show, our Locked On Recruiting Insider and does a great job, or Max Torres, who does an outstanding job covering Oregon recruiting specifically. Definitely give him a follow if you want, locked in. We won't say locked on, but locked in recruiting coverage over there. Max does a really, really good job talking to players, getting interviews and all that sort of stuff. I don't know that it changes a whole heck of a lot. And I answered a question that produced this same sort of answer recently here on the show. No matter what changes in college football, Oregon is in a position to succeed and adapt. They would recruit well if there wasn't NIL. They recruit well and there is NIL. They bring in talent via the portal. They would have a lot of talent if the portal wasn't a thing. It's just the way Oregon football has been, because as a university and community and as a coaching staff and administration, everybody's all in to get football to find that first national championship. And when you have that, whatever obstacles can present themselves don't matter, because you're going to have the resources and the mentality to overcome it. So I don't think that, that consideration is why players transfer to Oregon thinking, well, I can always leave next year if I don't like it. I think it's far more about fit with the coaching staff, and they would leave the following year if they didn't play as much as they thought or didn't get along, or you have the kid every now and then that might get homesick, but I don't think that's too major of a consideration. Okay, I want to close with this thought that I had. And there are a lot more mailbag questions that I'll be getting to next week on the show, because you guys have been pouring them in. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. I love answering you guys' questions. You got great angles to talk about the Ducks on here. So I had this thought about Kyler Kasper, who I've been a really, really big fan of since he committed to the Ducks. 6'6". He was the class of 2023, reclassified to 2022. He's going into his redshirt sophomore season, and he hasn't done anything of note with the Ducks other than, flash potential every now and then. So coming out of high school, Kyler Kasper was 6'6", 195 pounds. And I'm going to mention Kenyon Sadiq here for a moment, who was 6'3", 220 pounds and played tight end for Oregon last year and is now around 240 pounds because he's bulked up a little. He was a little bit on the thin side, but the thought I had on Kyler Kasper was, could he play tight end? This is just a random thought that popped in my head, but it kind of made some sense. You see tight ends that have big bodies and big frames, and, Kasper at 6'6", maybe a little taller than your traditional tight end, but a lot of tight ends, like Kenyon Sadiq, could also play wide receiver. And Kasper, coming out of high school, was 195. I think he certainly bulked up and is over 200 pounds. If he wanted to add some more muscle and change his body type, I don't know how much, he's necessarily going to play this year. I think he can work himself into the rotation. I think he's a tremendously talented guy, but he's a pretty big dude. And Sadiq is a pretty big dude. And last year at 220, Sadiq played tight end, and he was really good in the action that we did see. And, I wouldn't say this about just any wide receiver, but Kasper at 6'6", like that presents a big frame. You look at, a guy like Terrence Ferguson and his height. I don't remember off the top of my head. He's listed at 6'5" and 230 pounds. So, could Kasper put on like another 20 pounds? That was what he was coming out of high school, by the way. T-Ferg might be more. Oregon doesn't list their weights on their Oregon football roster online, but I just had that thought. Like, if he's not going to be able to crack the receiver rotation this year, yeah, he'd be a prime candidate to do it in 2025 if he sticks around. Oregon's also brought in a lot of talented receivers. This is another reason I think this thought kind of crossed my mind, because Jeremiah McLaughlin in the spring game looked good. Ryan Pellin could be good. Jurion Dickey, we know how talented that guy is. And you don't know what transfers are going to come in. And by the way, Gary Bryant Jr. could have another year because he started during the COVID season. So, and he has a red shirt in there as well. So I just wonder if he could play that tight end position. Oregon's thin at that position going into 2025 because they're going to lose T. Ferg. They're going to lose Patrick Herbert after this season. But, I mentioned yesterday on the show with Brian, they're going after 2025 tight end prospect Lincoln Cure. And they've got some young guys on the roster like Sadiq or AJ Pugliano or Roger Saliapaga perhaps could be at the tight end position. But Saliapaga, probably slots as a tight end. Don't think he has a frame that is all that different than Kyler Kasper. And if there isn't a path at the receiver room, then yeah, he could transfer out one day. But I think he could be a candidate with that size and frame and his catch radius to make a position change and give tight end to go. Just a thought. I don't know that would ever happen. Maybe Kasper's content to sit this year and barely see any touches and be one of the top targets next year. I don't know. That's just something that came into my head, and so I shared it here on the show. That's kind of how it goes. Not all the time. Keep the mailbag questions coming. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and go Ducks.